Hi, everyone. Today we talk to Dr. Aubrey Fine. He is the pioneer of animal assisted therapy. He's Professor Emeritus at Cal Poly and an adjunct professor at Utah State. But really, he's just the Dr. Doolittle of assisted animal therapy. This conversation is like no other. And I'm so grateful to have met him at the National Dog Show Therapy Dog Symposium, which, if any of you are thinking about having a therapy dog or want to learn more, you should join us. It's every year, the beginning of December. Go to the National Dog Show Therapy Dog Symposium at Rowan University to find out more. But right now, let's hear what Aubrey has to say about why pets matter to him and why pets matter to all of us. Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Why Do Pets Matter? This is Deborah Hamilton, and I am so grateful and in awe of my next guest, Dr. Aubrey Fine. He is Professor Emeritus at Cal Poly. He also is the pioneer of animal-assisted therapy. He was the keynote speaker at the National Dog Show Therapy Dog Symposium last year. That's where I met Aubrey, and I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to my audience. Aubrey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's an honor to be with you today as well.
Well, I love it. So, we ask just one question and then we go spelunking, which is probably not the correct word, but that's what I use, into your service to animals. So, why do they matter to you?
You know, you told me you were going to ask one question, and I didn't really think about it. And it's funny. I think that in so many ways, animals really make us more human. That sort of sounds funny in my terms, but um, I have a little quote that I'm sure that your listeners have read many, many times. I want to be the person that my dog thinks I am. I want to be the person that my horse thinks I am. Um, but in many, many ways, number one, the world is filled with all kinds of animals, human and non-human. And I think that being able to coexist with animals has really been extremely important to me, especially as a person that grew up without animals. My backstory when you said, that I was one of the early people that started being engaged in animal assisted interventions. But when I go back as a child, I never had an animal in my life. My mother didn't like animals. She promoted fear. I don't know if she really wanted us to be afraid, but definitely when we would walk down a street and we were near animals, she would say, stay away. And who would think many, many years later, I would live the life of like a Dr. Doolittle, except unlike Dr. Doolittle, I don't talk to animals. I talk to my own animals, of course, but I've learned to talk through them and to celebrate my being and to celebrate my work with people alongside therapy animals has been extremely enriching. So, answering your question, I think why do animals matter? I think we have to realize that there is a very large world out there, and there are many, many um, beings that we can coexist with. And I have just felt that broadening my horizon has been probably the greatest gift of all.
I love that because making sure you recognize that pets matter because they're all around us, whether they're your pets that live with you, or for me, the birds on my river and what I put on the grass that goes into the river. Those thoughts are really important when you're thinking about why animals matter to every part of our human lives.
Right.
The animal lives are all part of it. So I love that you brought that to this conversation, because I know when you gave your keynote, you had touched upon the fact that you didn't have animals as a child. But then when you started your practice, you brought animals in as sort of one of the first pioneers to use animal assisted therapy as a way to create an environment. Well, I'll let you explain what you were trying to do with the animals. You might not have known what you were doing at the beginning, and then all of a
No,
sudden it happened.
no, it's funny that you say that because really, Serendipity is probably my middle name. It shouldn't be Aubrey Howard. It should be Aubrey Serendipitous Fine, because I think the greatest part about living life is exploring and sometimes going down streets you never knew existed. And that's serendipity because what you learn from it. And so I began by accident with my first pet, actually, and her name was Sasha. She was a little gerbil. She wasn't really the first, in fact. We went to the store and I got a mouse. And when I brought the mouse to the house, to my house, my mom, a little Dr. Zeus there, my mom was really, really anxious. And she said, "Don't drop the rat." She called the mouse a rat. And I said, "This isn't going to work." So I went back to the store, said, "I don't want a refund. I'm going to keep the cage. I'll keep everything I have. But if you can hold the mouse for a few weeks, I'll come back after I calm my mother down." And that was when I was in college actually then in Montreal, and went to pick up the mouse. And as I was walking through a store, I saw gerbils, and I went, "Wow, I really, really like those animals." And that was the first pet that I had was a gerbil, and I brought the gerbil home, and the we became best of friends. And ironically, at that time I was working for the Quebec Association for Children with Learning Disabilities. And you have to understand, in the early 70s, the word learning disability meant many, many things. It meant some of the children there had learning disorders, some of them had ADHD, some of them had high functioning autism. Today we would use those terms. So many, many different kinds of youngsters were involved in that program. And I actually brought Sasha one day. I was the director of that program just as a share, nothing more than that, not really understanding what would come from it. But I loved Sasha at that point. She was my first little friend that I wanted to share with these kids who were important to me too. And I remember coming in the cold of a Canadian winter, and when I brought her in, some kids followed and said, "Well, what kind of animal is her? She's not a rat, she's not a mouse. What is she?" And I explained she was a gerbil. They asked some different kinds of questions. And then there were a couple of kids, but I remember one boy specifically, we'll name him Alan. And Alan said to me, "Tell me, can I hold her?" And I knew eventually that would come about, but I really didn't think this through, right? So I said, "Alan, come sit with me for a bit." And we went to a corner of the room. And I said, "Sit on down, have your legs crossed." And I told him a little bit about Sasha. And then I said to him, "I want you to take your hands and I want you to put them," and I'll move this down for a second. "I want you to put them right about on your tummy somewhere." And I said to him, and that was way before I even understood animal welfare and all the things that I advocate today about, that we have to give animals agency and we need to protect them. But I said to Mike, "You have to promise me you can't move around too much because I don't want to scare my little friend." And he understood that. So as he agreed to the process, I placed Sasha in his folded hands, and she was comfortable, and she began to meander on his tummy with his eyes beaming and a smile that was just um, ferocious. 53 years later, so this was in 1951 years later, 52 years later, in 1973. I don't remember all the details, but I remember seeing a little boy, must have been 8 or 9, looking at me with a sense of tremendous pride. And he said, I promised you I wouldn't move. And I didn't, did I? And my eyes opened up, and probably bigger than his. I went, wow. There was a youngster that today I would have diagnosed as having profound ADHD. And I said, he was able to self-regulate. And that changed my trajectory of my career. I still became that psychologist, but I shared so many decades along so many species of animals, ranging from gerbils to other small animals like rabbits and guinea pigs. And then I started to work with exotic birds. So I had cockatoos, conures, lovebirds, cockatiels. Um, and then eventually, I started to work alongside some of the therapy dogs or the dogs that joined me. And, I wrote a book years later called Afternoons with Puppy. And my first therapy dog, her name was Puppy. I chose that title not because it was only about Puppy, but as a college professor, I taught college students mainly in the morning and maybe in the early evening. But I spent a lot of time in the afternoons doing what I loved the best, which was working alongside children. But I worked alongside children with so many of the animals that shared the platform with me. So Afternoons with Puppy was that way of saying, here we were every afternoon, the best times of my day, and we shared lessons together. And um, that was a tremendous dance. I called the work that I did with animals dancing seamlessly, learning to be one rather than two, in working with well-trained therapy animals that have affiliative behaviors, wanting to do this work, giving them agency and choice, but they were very consistent in what they did in regards to knowing that they would work well with youngsters. So um, those were wonderful years, all beginning with that little friend Sasha. And when I left Canada many, many years later, I left Canada in 76. So Sasha was with me already for over 4 years. And it was funny that the mother that didn't like animals was the person that kept Sasha the rest of her life.
Yeah.
So people change. And I remember when she used to visit me in California, she sometimes would nod her head, going, "Oh my God, it's like uh, a miniature zoo here, where we had dogs and birds and all kinds of creatures." But she didn't totally get it, but appreciated what they gave my family. And my children were blessed with growing up with animals all of their lives. And I think having animals in their lives, I could write about this academically, but I walk the talk, I live the dream. That in many ways I watched how animals help my children learn to be better humans, learn to take on responsibility. Their first experience of losing a loved one was with an animal. And how do you bereave appropriately, and how do you share those feelings? So many wonderful lessons, all beginning with a little gerbil.
A little gerbil named Sasha. And Aubrey, I have to say, I often said to my kids they were lucky their mother was crazy and wanted lots of dogs, because first of all, they had to share me, right? And secondly, they had to have responsibility as well for the welfare of the animals, because there was no way that, I'm sure you were the same way with your kids, because kids don't necessarily innately know they're harming something until you teach them better. And so I know you had spoken about the fact that Alan, I think we used a different name at the symposium, you really wanted to make sure that the animal was safe. And I know in all of your practice, that was something that was so important to you, that as long as you were getting the benefits from animal assisted therapy, because there's so much that richness there, that the animal was there of its own free will, that it was into it as much as it wanted to be. And if it had a bad day, I know you said during your conversation with us at the therapy dog symposium, it took a day off.
No, not only that, I think I learned very quickly, and it's funny. that you say this. See, I learned it intuitively. This whole field, ironically, I knew what I knew and I knew what I didn't know. So I knew as a psychologist that I was trained in doing this, and I've always continued my education so I could refine my skill set. That's important. But I knew that I didn't know a lot about animals, right? So over the course of the last 50 years, I've taken training classes on ethology, animal behavior, nutrition of animals so that they don't get as plump as I do. Um, so early on, I always believed in the fact that we needed to think about the animal's well-being as much as what we were doing in therapy. Because in fact, good animal welfare is not only good for the animal, it's actually good for the whole process. But taking that even a step further, I feel very strongly that so many people, well, many people early on really never thought about these issues. We were there to promote human wellness and human well-being. And I know that probably 99% of the people that I always talk with were very much concerned about their animals' well-being. But I think I'm not saying that I was exceptionally thoughtful of this, but right from the beginning, I've always felt that I was their voice, that they were coming and enjoyed what they did, or at least it appeared, in my opinion, that they were enjoying it. They were stressless. To a very good degree. I would always give them chances to leave an environment whenever, but they had breaks. They had good nutrition. But I always let kids know that it had to be an animal's choice. And when kids said, "Can I pet your dog?" even on the street, I always say, "You don't ask me if you want to pet my animal. You ask the animal." And people sometimes look at me with eyes of puzzlement. But I feel that one of the challenges that I've noticed, even in companion animal opportunities, is we don't see that issue of agency that clearly. We don't see that the importance of that. When you look at life trajectory, there's a difference between a puppy and a senior animal. And really, I love both parts of the spectrum. I think my soft heart is more with older animals. Um, I just love that period of life, although it's the hardest part when you have to say goodbye. But I think, with parents that think that you're going to get a child a dog and the child's all of a sudden going to take responsibility and be this great citizen and do all these things. That's not the case. It's part of teaching and sharing your life. And how many times when we would go to town, sometimes my wife and I would she would go visit the relatives and I would stay home, or vice versa, because we couldn't get the proper babysitter and we weren't just going to have someone just
Kennel.
watch the animal.
Right.
In fact, in the olden days when I had the birds, and they're big birds, and I had lizards, we alongside the dogs, we sometimes would have to have different babysitters. Someone that would stay over, but someone that would be much more comfortable in feeding a large cockatoo versus a lizard or what have you. It's learning that having an animal in your life, and I'm going beyond the discussion with therapy animals, but learning that having an animal in life is truly a gift, but it's a gift that comes with responsibility. And I sometimes feel saddened when I think of people that think that this is just going to be this easy opportunity. And I'm not saying easy is the wrong choice of words, but things that are worth having are worth working for. And so I have always felt that just sharing my lifestyle with animals has been remarkable, and I've had to learn from them. They've taught me, and even when I get flustered, I love my golden retrievers. I have mainly goldens over all of these years, but any of the dogs in my life, they would sort of look at me like, why are you getting aggravated? They become my barometer. And so as I worked alongside animals therapeutically, of course, with this another part of your question, we've learned to work seamlessly, because sometimes they anticipate things that I may not consciously be aware of in clients. On the other hand, um, early on when people were doing this initial work, we of course used the animals as a social catalyst, that they got people to become more comfortable and engaging. But over the years, of course, of doing this, I've learned so many ways to work alongside the therapy animals for teaching and ways to help better understand empathy. I've used animals to help kids with mindfulness, learning how to breathe appropriately, how to become more tranquil and more relaxed. And in many ways, the animals have become excellent teachers in doing that as well.
Aubrey, that goes back to making sure when you think about getting an animal that you need to understand their needs as well. It's not just
Hmm.
about the human animal bond, big H, little a. It's same size, HA, because the animals are counting on you, right? They're counting on you. They trust you. They believe you're going to take really good care of them because that's their mindset. They don't have any of the negativity that may come from the human side of the world. And so if you can create the space for your students, for your kids, for your patients, where they understand that we are all here to develop best efforts going forward, no matter what it is. Like the little boy who said, "Look, I sat still." And that was his best effort. His best effort was, I want to hold Sasha. And so if I hold Sasha and I sit still, I'm going to really gain from that. And I can tell you that my experience has been that my animals have been great ambassadors for me out in the world, and also for the breed Irish setters, because hardly anybody sees them anymore. Uh, but also they have created and sustained an empathetic ear, because if you watch your animals, they are always aware of, for you, Aubrey, what's happening in your life, but also for your patients and for your students, what's happening in their lives. And they are so attentive. And as you said, I loved it because I know my dogs know me better than I know myself. They catch on to things. And if you're watching them as a practitioner, you probably see things that the dog is indicating, and you're like, wow, I have to explore that a little more.
The whole notion of emotional contagion and in fact, animals being able to read our behavior. Of course, when you think of the domestication of dogs, 15 to 30,000 years ago, the dogs that were able to read us better were the ones that became closer to our circles. I think that's something that we need to understand extremely well, is that certain animals over the course of thousands and thousands of years have learned to coexist with humans extremely well. Dogs have tremendous nonverbal reasoning skill sets, although we've also learned that they're a lot smarter than people imagine with, dog cognition research over the years. But I think that it's important for all of us to recognize that as we become more sophisticated in our relationships, I still like the notion of keeping things simple. That in fact, I just finished writing an article on what they call the pet effect, which is, people talk about the importance of animals in our lives because of all the health benefits. And, we've been studying this since the late 70s, early 80s, which was some of the precursors to the field of human animal bond. In fact, the term human animal bond was originated in Scotland, Dundee, Scotland, in about 1976 was the first time that it was used. But the pet effect, is where people say, pets are good because it helps bring down your blood pressure and stress levels, and it makes us feel better, like that, the oxytocin that we talk about. But I want to turn it back a little bit and to talk about Sasha, or talk about my horse friends. In fact, yesterday I did a photo shoot with my favorite horse. that we became friends 14 years ago because my university was built on the land of Mr. Kellogg's Arabian Horse Center. She had another foal, and it was a colt. And finally, they named a foal after me. So the horse's name is Fine-tastic. So yesterday, I did the photo shoot with mom and the little guy, and you have to see. Right when I see them, my wife would often say, and I'm going to go out of the context for a second, if I'm a little grumpy or whatever, she'll say, go visit your girlfriend, the horse. And of course, everything changes. But what I wanted to say is, at the end of the day, did I get Sasha because of the pet effect? Did I get Puppy for the pet effect? Did I get all these animals? And no, because I wanted to have companionship with a non-human being. And so, although pet effect is the benefits that I reap, it really is the relationship, it's the process. And when I use the word process, there's ups and downs, right? So the goods are the exciting parts, the good things, the fun things. Coming home and what was it like in the olden days when I would come home and we had lots of dogs and birds. It was like the Calgary Stampede, running to the door. He's home. It's not like my wife is running and screaming, he's home. You know, uh, you think of the old TV show Cheers. People went to the bar not because they drank, but because everybody knew their name. Well, when I come home, everybody knows my name. And,
Yeah.
and we celebrate that together. And so, what I want to share is although all of those benefits that we could talk about are real, when you talk to normal people, the people that live in our communities all around us, sometimes when people say, it's neat that you're doing the research, the science of all of this, but I'll tell you the truth, I knew this. I knew my animal was important to me. I cry when my animals die, and how happy I am today that society is more accepting of the importance of animals in our lives. That at one time, pets were pets, and people would say, well, if it doesn't work out, just go get a new one. But I remember when I had a lizard and her name was Spiky, that Spiky had an eye infection, but it wasn't really an eye infection, it was actually a glandular infection. And I knew that. And I spent a lot of my, not a lot of money, but I spent money taking her to the vet and getting her taken care of. And someone said, well, geez, why are you doing this? Just go get another lizard. And I said, that's not the case. Spiky is the one that I'm helping because we have developed that relationship. And so I feel very strongly that if you said to me, your first question was, I forget the exact wording, what do animals mean to you or why do
Why do pets matter?
would, they've taught me what's important in life,
Mm.
that tinsel and tin isn't what's important to me. You won't be remembered for all the books you wrote or the money that you have in the bank. Maybe some people will remember that, but you know, you'll be remembered on how you make others feel. And my animals have made me feel wanted, and we have shared that important four letter word, love, together. That I know is not scientific, but in reality, that's what it's meant to me. That we have been able to do things that are meaningful, not only to me but to them, and that's what the human animal bond is. It's that reciprocal relationship. Sometimes I may want to take a walk, but they don't want to take a walk. So guess what? We don't walk.
Yeah. Or you
Sometimes,
walk alone. I've done that.
right. Or sometimes they want to walk and I don't want to walk, but you know what? It's a give
I
and
walk.
take.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a give and take.
It's a
Yep.
give and take. And that's what's so important. So, we could have spent this whole time talking about animal assisted therapy and animal welfare, but we
But it's
talked about all of it, and we talked about the importance of animals in people's lives, that purpose of being and purpose of sharing. I've met so many people over the years that their only friends were non-humans. It helped alleviate loneliness, isolation, and when you think about it, and it's something to consider. We had a pandemic. We lived a whole year and so in isolation. And for some people, the greatest outlet that they had was to be able to share their lives with their animals, and the
Yeah.
importance of touch and sitting next to proximity. Sometimes the greatest thing for me is not having a full-fledged conversation with a human, but sometimes sitting in solace next to a dog and petting a dog and gazing into each other's eyes. So,
Yeah, you and I both. I think it was Maya Angelou who said it's not what you give someone, it's how you make them feel. Or it could have been Eleanor Roosevelt. I'm
no,
not.
it was my Angela. I didn't want to say the name right off the bat because if I was wrong, but that's who it is. Yeah.
And you know, it's it is so much like that because they always work to make you feel, period. Feel good, feel bad, whatever. They are there to hold a safe space for you, because I know that there are times when I've been upset or I've lost one dog and then the other dogs are there, and somebody said to me, but they're all the same. I said, um, yeah, no, they're not all the same. Like, people aren't all the same. If you have six kids and you lose one, it doesn't mean that, well, you have five more, get over it. It's not the same, because each one has this unique personality. And so I breed my Irish setters. And when I send a puppy home, I loved when you put it up front that, here they are, they come home, they're puppies, you're so excited. And then, you have an older dog and you love that last hurrah, that last watching the sunset with them, right? And I always think when I give somebody this beautiful bundle of red fur who's naughty, although they're pretty good when they leave, but they could be very naughty once they get home, usually about 18 days, because then they know you're not going to give them back, so they they know the time limit. um but I recognize I've given them the best day of their life taking the dog home, and then I recognize that I'm going to have to be there for them for the worst day of their lives, because at some point you're going to have to say goodbye, and you always want to say goodbye a day early than a day late, in my opinion, because that is the beauty of the love you have shared with them, and the grace and support and absorbing of your energy that you needed to unload. They really create that ability for you, if you're open to it and if you're able to do it, which is always a question we'll have to explore at a later time. But if you're open to it, recognizing that they can absorb the energy you have and give you the energy that you need. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think that everyone needs a champion. And for some people, their champion could be their animal. And just as a thought, as you said those last moments, I think of the last dog that this happened with me. Was her name was Ketsi, and Ketsi was a golden that in her latter years she had uveitis, which then caused her, it's like human glaucoma, you know what I mean? And so we had to remove an eye. And I remember at first I wondered how the children would react to her. And they all learned to say, they all said to her, "Oh, Ketsi, you're just as beautiful. We love you." And then as she aged, she got more and more tired. But let me tell you, I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in October 2 years ago, in the pitch of the dark during the daytime. The person that was sitting for our dog called and said, because I was on shore at that moment, that she wasn't doing well. And we video chatted, and I saw her. I said, "Well, let's bring her right to the vet." I spoke to the vet, and I'm very cautious of quality of life and good deaths. And she seemed to be really struggling because she was just not moving around. And he said, "Well, let me check her out and we'll talk later on." But you don't know what it's like to say goodbye to a dog in the pitch darkness of the Atlantic Ocean with no lights around you. And there I am after about 20 minutes of trying to figure out how to get through to him, screaming, give me your Zoom, your email address, and we'll try to figure out how to do a Zoom." And we got a Zoom. He could hear me. I couldn't hear him, and that was okay because I could speak. And for 40 minutes in the pitch darkness around me, all around outside, there wasn't a glimmer except a, a star. And I said all the things that I needed to. And then I looked at her and said, "Honey, it's time for us to say goodbye. But you're going to hear my voice until you fall asleep. And then we said goodbye. And so the hard part about life is we know two things. We know the beginning and we know the end. And I just hold on to all those lifetimes. And let me tell you, my lifetime, my ride with animals beside me, around me, has been just tremendous. And I would share that with all of your listeners that sure, there's sad times, but those sad times are totally outweighed with one remembering the good times and remembering that if you didn't appreciate the love you had in your heart, then you wouldn't be feeling those feelings. So I know that we can't talk forever, but um, I
I
thought that
love
was a nice way to end the story. That
Oh, I love it. And we are coming to the end. And Aubrey, it's interesting you said that, because when friends of mine lose their dogs, I send them love and I send them strength. And I also usually say something to the effect of, this is the hardest part of the adventure we take with our beloved dogs, cats, birds, horses, but we wouldn't give up a minute of the adventure to miss this.
Mm-mm.
We'd like to
And
miss it, but we can't, but we wouldn't
no,
give up a minute of the adventure.
but you know this the day you get an animal that in most cases we will outlive them. Sometimes that's not the case. It's an adventure that would be totally uneventful and would be void of richness because celebrating your life with a non-human is something that is hard to talk about. You know, I even wrote a story years ago, Follow the Yellow Brick Road, like Dorothy, but it leads home. Just like Dorothy had to go all the way to Oz in this imaginary story to realize that there's no place like home. Well, I went all the way to Africa. I went to the Arctic Circle to see what animals meant to me. But every time I was there, it always led home
Yeah.
because it was at home where I had all of those loving feelings. So I want to wish all of your listeners my best. And if they want to get in contact with me, you can share that with them at some point. But happy to dialogue with others and again celebrate the champions that we have. And champions don't have to have two legs; they can have four legs or wings, or they can be sliders.
Yeah.
Um, but they definitely can be meaningful.
Aubrey, thank you so much. This has been such, for me, an extraordinary discussion with someone who really has created and seeks to foster the ability for our pets to be loved, understood, respected, and permitted to do what they do best, which is to make our lives whole.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was good to talk with you. Wish you well, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. And
Yes, we will. Thank you so much. And to everyone who's listening, remember to go home and kiss your pets for me. This is Deborah Hamilton and the Why Do Pets Matter podcast. And until next time, love your pets every minute you have. Thanks, Aubrey.
thank you. Bye bye.